What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be another album review for a new album of 2021 releases, and I'm going to be reviewing the very anticipated album from the metal band Carcass, entitled Torn Arteries. Now this is the band's 7th studio album, released through German-based record label of Nuclear Blast Records, and this marks the band's first album in 8 years as a follow-up to their album of Surgical Steel in 2013. Legendary British-formed death metal band Carcass has released their first album to follow up Surgical Steel, and out of all of the albums that I have been anticipated for and reviewed, this album, along with the upcoming new Mastodon album, has been one of the very, very high top most anticipated, as that I think they've been one of my favorite metal bands, and their discography, as very influential and important. They started things out as a grindcore gore grind, and then they decide to go into multiple directions and versatility with their sound, and then incorporating some more onto the death metal, melodic death metal arrangements in their later albums. And to follow up Surgical Steel, to me, is a very big move. Surgical Steel was absolutely one of their very best albums, and as one of the best metal albums of the 2010s. Their discography has been one of my favorites, and I'll have to personally address that these guys are really, really versatile driven and very much a consistent band with one of the best metal discographies. The first track on this album, the title track, Torn Arteries, is just an awesome opener. Very thrashy and groovy oriented number, so much action onto the double bass drumming, as well as the very vicious vocals along with the music, as it changes things, moving along into a lot of menacing, versatile guitars and occasional blast beats. And I think that this track opens the album very, very strongly. To the second track of the album, of Dance of Ixtab, you hear some more of the sounds on percussive drumming beginnings and hand claps to anticipate the beat. It's very melodically arranged onto the verse sections, and the guitars deliver some more on a mid-tempo stomping beat, matching the drums together. And I do find it catchy, some inventive drumming and awesome tight lead guitar work. A very, very good number to follow up the band's opening track. One of my favorite numbers on the album, Eleanor, Rigor, Mortis, which is an explosive beginning on wonderful lead guitars and a very energetic start, and then the band takes it down to another dirgy, groovy, riff-oriented sounds. The vocals on this track in particular sounded grunty and vile. You hear some moments that you hear multi-tracked vocals, which matches along these brilliant, slick riffs. This is an aggressive number as it descends into a more violent mark of territory, and this is one of the best numbers on the album, and one of my personal favorites, as I do think as well that some of the riffs work as strong and as one of the best ones that the band had ever done. To the next track on the album, of Under the Scalpel Blade. This track opens at a monstrous way, and I do think that there were these wonderfully executed driving breakdown sections as they sound destructive. It was just absolutely crushing. The band were very tight on this particular track, and there's just a lot more versatility, which makes the instrumentation well crafted, and the vocal parts on this track sounded disgusting, and I really like the progressive different direction marks onto this track, as all of these pieces were working together. And as well as onto the next track on The Devil Rides Out, You hear the opening sound on distorted droning chords and guitar feedback, and then the music switches into another set of brilliant, punchy, admirable riffs. There are moments on this track you hear these twin guitar harmonies, as the band have done that previously, but there's a lot of that going on this track. But this is just a stellar mark of musicianship with adventurous styles of beats as it brings in so much chemistry. And I really like this track because of its presentation and one of the other highlights on this album. To the next song of flesh-ripping sonic Torment Limited. This is the longest track on the album at almost 10 minutes. And this is possibly my favourite number on this album so far. Brief set on acoustic reverb tones. And then as the band bursts in, there's so much direction and versatility all at one package on this song. This sets in the mood on multiple sets of tempos and brooding structures, brutal energy-made verse sections, and then some switching paths of slowing things down to some more doomy apocalyptic sounds, and then switching back and forth moments. A lot of stuff going on in this song. But I think that these separate pieces were matching together without missing anything out. There are some points onto the guitars that sounded very addictive, and as the drumming patterns go at the same time, this is a massive composition, and I absolutely think this is one of the standout numbers on the album, especially onto the musicianship, which was just as phenomenal as ever. Kelly's Meat Emporium. The band were deciding to make more on the aesthetic, thrashy riffs on instrumentation. The band on this song sounded really stellar and tight. They were bringing in a lot of the blazing and menacing aggressive sound, which I really do like this track, but personally, to follow up their previous few tracks earlier on the album, this was, to me, very good, though not really one of the other massive numbers. But I do admire what the band wanted to deliver into this particular track. Same goes on to the next track of In God We Trust, slowing the tempo down this time around as you hear a lot of the prominent bass lines and the interactions on the guitars. The music onto this track was switching into a lot of the melodic alternate picking as the drums match. Mood-wise, this song strangely reminds me on a bit of like a metalcore-ish type of versatility, but thankfully there's some more differences into the music as that there were a lot more clean and delicate, beautiful guitar tones and massive interplay into this one piece. Wake Up and Smell the Carcass, simplifying the riffs once again, and I very much like the intensity on this one. Blasting cacophonies. There's a lot of punishing action all the way into this track. It's a bit of a progressive number, and the second half of the track was fantastic as the sound of the band sounded just as brilliant. And I really do love the sound of the band here. They were just not skipping anything from a beat to a riff, and so many differences into the instrumentation. This is possibly the most adventurous album that Carcass had put out, while as much as I do love a lot on albums like Heartwork and Surgical Steel, etc., there's a point in the album that made me feel that the band were more of an explorative, direction-driven band, and I will have to personally think that this is one of the slickest and most brilliantly crafted and experimenting sounding, and I really find that these guys are just one of the best bands in musicianship factor as well. The last track on the album, The Sky's Remorseless Swing. Opening wise, this is on a bit of like a heavy metal style introduction, and you hear the sounds of a bell to another very catchy rhythmic approach, and they add a lot of multiplying sounds on thrashy aesthetic drumming. Some of the drum fills were just as spectacular as they were just incredible and very effective, well arranged guitar riffs. There's some more melody into the brutality as the song was continuing along the way, and I think that this was just a very, very good closing track to finalize this album. The vocal performances on this album really ravenous, and you hear these guttural, grunty sounding vocals that I really like very, very much. Bring in a lot of driving, aggressive, and murky, filthy sounds of the band's Markov music, and to make this album their first since Surgical Steel in close to a decade, this was always worth it of my anticipation, and the production was just as incredible. It's just outstanding. Every bit of sound and mixing on this album marks this as one of the band's best albums in production value. Overall, this anticipation of an album of Torn Arteries by Carcass was just an awesome album. Personally, maybe would pick this as one of their best albums, but not as strongly like on Surgical Steel, to Necroticism or Heartwork, but this album was easily marking this as one of the best metal albums of the year. I'm going to give this album a 9 out of 10, and I'm very curious to know what you guys personally think of this album in the comments down below. Do you think that it was worth of the anticipation? Do you think it's one of the best albums in the band's discography? I am very interested to know what you think of this album. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, I will keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.